Welcome to the dark world of scary stories. A place where every sound is a premonition of the unknown, and every shadow is a step into another dimension. If you're ready to open the door to the scariest secrets, subscribe to the channel and don't forget to hit the bell, because the scariest is yet to come. Turn on the light and let's begin. The Dream Collector. Betza had always been an ordinary girl. She led an ordinary life, a job at a bookstore, an old apartment in the city center, and friends with whom she spent her evenings over a cup of tea. But from the moment she found the old notebook in the attic, her world changed. It was worn, with cracked spines and soft pages, on which strange notes appeared. Betza had always loved exploring old things, so she immediately opened the notebook, hoping to find something interesting. And indeed, there were strange entries. Do you smell the scent of fear? Dreams that don't belong to you. You have what I'm looking for. And although her mind screamed at her not to open these notes, she couldn't put the notebook down. Something pulled her in. Over the next few days, Betza began to notice something unusual. She fell asleep faster, and her dreams became more intense, vivid, and real. The sensations were so real that in the morning, she could remember every movement, every word spoken to her by an unknown man in the dream. However, the scariest part started a few nights later when Betza noticed that the same man, always in a black suit, with dark eyes that never left her face, appeared in her dreams. At first, she thought it was just a coincidence, but each time it became more real, and the man seemed more tangible. She woke up with the feeling that someone was standing next to her, someone was watching her. One such night, when Betza woke up in the middle of the night and looked at the clock, a strange message appeared on her phone. She knew she hadn't set an alarm. It was just a text. You saw me. And I know your dreams. Her heart froze. She couldn't remember telling anyone about her dreams. Who could have written this? And how did he know she had seen him at night? Betza didn't dare reply to the message. However, the next day, she went to the old bookstore where she often worked, and there she met a stranger. He looked exactly like the man from her dreams. Black suit, dark eyes. You can't get rid of what has already become part of you, he said as he approached her. You're already mine, Betza. I'm taking your fear, your thoughts. You'll become part of my collection. The next day, Betza couldn't sleep. The dreams again became incredibly real, and this man was no longer just watching her. Now, he was part of every one of her dreams, controlling every movement, laughing as she tried to escape. He was everywhere. And worst of all, she could no longer distinguish where dreams ended and reality began. One night, she woke up barely able to breathe from fear. This was not just a nightmarish illusion. She felt him, his presence in the room. He was standing there, in the dark, with strange black hands reaching for her face. I'll take you, Betza, he whispered. You won't be alone anymore. All her attempts to escape from him were in vain. He kept taking her dreams, swallowing her into his dark collection. She began to feel that at every step, she was not alone, that every movement of hers was being watched. She could no longer tell where the dream ended and where reality began. The last time she saw him in a dream, he smiled. Now you're part of me, he said. And her body, though physically present in reality, became part of his dark collection. She never woke up again. When Betza woke up, she couldn't immediately understand where she was. It wasn't her apartment, not her bed. Surrounding her was a deep darkness, with nothing but undefined shadows and whispers that seemed to echo her own thoughts. She tried to get up, but her legs wouldn't obey. How much time had passed? How had she ended up here? And then she heard his voice. It was close, so close that his words wrapped around her like a cold wind. Do you think you can escape? He laughed. This is just the beginning. Betza tried to open her eyes, but even that was difficult. Her eyelids felt heavy, and she could feel the darkness flooding in. All her attempts to move were in vain. She was trapped in her own dream. Was it a dream? Or was it reality? There was no answer. Only the echo of her fear, pounding in her ears. And then, in the dark space, she saw him again. The man in the black suit stood in the darkness, a smile on his face that seemed more sinister than ever. You won't be able to escape, Betza. This is no longer just a dream. Now, you are part of me. Your mind belongs to me. At his words, Betza's heart tightened. She felt her consciousness slowly slipping away from her. She could no longer control her thoughts. Every movement, every memory of hers became a part of this nightmare. He was stealing her dreams, her experiences, and now reality itself felt foreign, undefined. You'll never leave this world, Betza. I'll take your worst nightmares, and you'll be with me forever, he said, his voice growing so powerful that it felt like the very air around her became heavy, unbearable. Betza began to feel as though her body no longer belonged to her. She couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't even think without feeling his presence in every cell of her being. And then she understood. He wasn't just manipulating her dreams, he was devouring her, forcing more and more of her mind to become part of this dark, endless space. She was a prisoner in a labyrinth, and every move she made only dug her deeper into his hell. Suddenly, new shadows appeared. They crept slowly toward her from all sides, and Betza realized that this wasn't just a dream. These were other victims who had once fallen into his web. Their eyes were empty, their faces marked only by the imprint of the terror they had experienced when they arrived. They never leave, one of them whispered, their voice sounding like the echo of her own thoughts. You won't either. We are all here, forever. No, this couldn't be allowed. Betza began to struggle, even as her consciousness started to crumble and her thoughts began to blur. She didn't know how it was possible, but one thought filled her mind. I must escape. I must find a way back. Escape this labyrinth. And in that moment, when everything seemed hopeless, she saw him again. He stood before her, smiling. Well, you're trying, Betza. But you've forgotten one thing. You are already part of my collection. You'll never leave me. She could no longer hold herself together. She felt her mind and body tear apart, and the pieces of her that were ripped away became part of his endless collection. And then she understood. This wasn't just a nightmare. This was eternity. When the light appeared again, and Betza opened her eyes, she realized she was no longer in the world she once knew. She was now only a part of him, part of his collection, with no way to return. And in every dream, every nightmare, she heard his voice. You are mine, and you will be mine forever. He had collected another soul. And this was just the beginning. Time lost its meaning in Betza's new world. Days and nights blended into one endless sensation of uncertainty. She no longer felt reality. Her body and soul had become part of something larger, unknown, and terrifying. All those who had come to this place were connected by one nightmare, but now, it had become her reality. Her consciousness shattered, and Betza couldn't even tell where her memories ended and where new nightmares began. She could feel the other souls around her whispering incomprehensible words. These were the souls of those who had already become part of this endless labyrinth of dreams. Each of them had once been a resident of the real world, and each had their own story, their own tragedy. They had all become part of his collection, eternally living in the darkness, with no hope of escaping. You're not alone, Betza, said one of them, an old man standing next to her. His face was pale and lifeless, like the rest of these poor souls. We're all here. All of us in the collection, and we were all chosen by him. He's coming for you, and you won't escape. We were all like you. All of us. Her hand seemed to grip his, but he was just an apparition, an immaterial spirit, forever bound to this place. What will he do to us? Betza whispered, barely able to speak. What happens next? He will consume you. Your dreams, your fears, your memories. All of it will become part of his collection. And you'll never wake up again. Her hope was hanging by a very thin thread. What if she could overcome this? What if there was even a small chance? She was determined. Betza knew she couldn't stay here forever. But how? Now, her dreams became even more real, as if she could no longer tell them apart from the real world. She heard footsteps. Not hers, not anyone's. They were drawing closer. And then, one day, she saw him again. He stood in the darkness, as always, his eyes glowing with a dark light that seemed to consume every cell of her body. "You don't understand, Betza," he said quietly. "You've always been mine. Your fears, your nightmares, your dreams. I've always been waiting for you." Betza felt her heart clench with terror. She couldn't look at him any longer. "If you've taken me, I won't be part of you," she cried out, not knowing whether it was a cry of defiance or just despair. And then the unimaginable happened. Something inside her exploded. Not strength, not anger, but fear, the kind of fear that seemed to scorch every cell of her body. She saw a blinding light. It was brief but intense. Suddenly, she was surrounded by all these souls. They seemed to sense that she was trying to change something. They all began to move together, creating a powerful wave that prevented him from getting closer to Betza. They had all become part of her fight. She screamed, and at that moment, it felt like the world itself began to crack. This was her chance. She didn't know if she could escape, but if this was her only chance at salvation, she had to try. All her attempts to escape were in vain. The collector wouldn't let her leave this world. Her dream had become a real hell, and it wasn't a coincidence. This was his planned game. Her first attempt to escape was simply part of his plan. But Betza was no longer afraid. She was no longer just a part of this world. She had become something greater. She was a conscious part of this game, and she knew she could defeat him. In the final battle, when all the surrounding souls became her allies, when her will, her determination, became stronger than any darkness, she clenched her fist and declared, "I will get out of here. I will live. I won't be part of your collection." And in that moment, she realized she could escape. She was no longer part of him. The darkness began to crumble, but before her eyes, instead of being free, she saw him. And he was already there. Would this be her end? Or freedom? The darkness around her began to fade. She stood there, not knowing if she would ever see the light again, or if this nightmare would last forever. But she was ready for it. Betza stood in the darkness, feeling how every movement she made disturbed the calm around her. Her soul was no longer weak, it was filled with anger and determination. All her fears, doubts, and pains had become her strength. She realized one thing. In this world of dreams, darkness, and nightmares, there was nothing that could hurt her if she didn't allow it. The dream collector, who had once seemed all-powerful and invincible, now appeared less formidable. His dark figure, still hanging in front of her, seemed less influential, as if the darkness itself was losing its strength in the face of her growing fire within. She took the first step forward, and he spoke, though his voice was less confident than usual. "You don't understand, Betza," he said. "You're still in my game. You're a part of me. And you can't escape." But Betza wasn't afraid. She took a deep breath, feeling how the space around her began to seem less dense, less confined. She felt her will strengthen. "I'm not your part, collector. I'm not afraid anymore." The shadow that had once been a monster to her consciousness shrank. She knew that to break free completely, she needed to shatter his control, to destroy his connection to her emotional experiences. For the first time in her life, Betza saw something beyond the darkness. It was a feeling, as if somewhere out there, beyond the horizon, something greater existed that could be her salvation. She took a few steps into the darkness, then another. And suddenly, light. A bright light, so blinding that it made her flinch. It was so strong that Betza recoiled, raising her hand to shield herself. And when she was finally able to open her eyes, she found herself in a different place. It was a place that resembled a vast hall, filled with ancient books and artifacts. The walls were covered in dark paintings, and there was silence here. And before her stood a man. It was him, the collector, but his appearance had changed. He was no longer just a dark shadow, but a real man in a dark suit, with a pale face and empty eyes. "This is my true form," he said. You've entered my world, Betza. All your fears, all your nightmares. I created them. And now, you're a part of this world. It seemed that everything she had experienced was nothing more than part of this reality. But she was ready to fight. I'm not afraid anymore, Betza said firmly. She was stubborn. All these horrors that tried to break her only hardened her soul. Now she understood. She couldn't defeat him by just trying to run. She needed to confront him. Do you really think you can defeat me? He said again, sounding incredibly confident. He extended his hand to her, and black, liquid energy oozed from his fingers, enveloping everything around them. Betza felt how it enraged her. She wasn't powerless. The burning fire in her heart flared brighter. She gathered all her memories, her fears, and nightmares, and instead of running from them, she used them as her power. I'm not your victim, Betza screamed. A powerful stream of light erupted from her body and enveloped the dark man. She felt how every nightmare, every fear he had collected in his collection, weakened. Betza knew that everything she had gone through had become her strength. And suddenly, everything around her began to crumble. The dream collector tried to defend himself, but it was in vain. His shadowy figure dissipated, and the entire world he had created began to melt away. You have no power over me, Betza said again, this time with absolute certainty. The collector's shadow vanished like smoke in the air, and the world around her began to fall apart. Betza was no longer a part of him. She was free. She had survived it all and remained whole. Betza woke up. This time, when her eyes opened, she felt the cold breath of the morning. She was home. Everything around her was familiar, but some things were different from before. Her heart beat calmly, and there was no longer any fear in her eyes. She was free, and now her thoughts were no longer consumed by nightmares. But deep in her heart, one thought remained. Was it all real? And if it was, would she ever see the one who once trapped her dreams again? But she knew one thing for sure. This time, she would be ready. Betza woke up in her bed, feeling the air fill with the freshness of the morning. The room looked familiar, but she sensed a strange tremor in the air. She slowly rose, sitting on the edge of the bed, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Everything around her seemed like it was part of a nightmare lingering in her mind. She looked at her hands. They were trembling, as if after a long nightmare. She clenched her fists and felt her blood pulse. Her fears hadn't disappeared, but now it was a different feeling. It wasn't loss, it wasn't captivity. It was victory. She approached the window, looking out at the vast cityscape. The sun was rising over the horizon, but in her gaze remained the fear that the dream collector might return. But she knew. Now, she was ready. A few days passed, and Betza began to notice strange things. She sat at her usual spot in the cafe, and suddenly her eyes fell on one of the old newspapers lying on the table. On one of the pages was a photograph of a woman she couldn't recognize. Her eyes were empty, but even those empty eyes seemed familiar. Betza turned the newspaper over. On the back was a caption, "Missing without a trace." And then her heart tightened. She remembered all the souls she had seen in her nightmare. All those faces. All those people. This wasn't just a nightmare. It was something real. And not just from her past. Betza realized that the dream collector probably didn't just take people to his labyrinths. He also left traces of his victims in the real world. She instantly grabbed her phone and dialed a number saved in her contacts. It was her best friend Lila's number. But the phone call went unanswered. Betza started to panic. This wasn't a coincidence. She knew that at this very moment, Lila could be next. Next on the list. That night, she couldn't sleep. All her thoughts were focused on one thing. The dream collector. How did he work? How could he take people and leave no trace? And why, even after she escaped his labyrinth, did that fear still remain? Suddenly, the light in her room went out. At first, Betza thought it was just a power outage, but then she realized, she felt it again. It was the same cold she had felt in that darkness. And it wasn't just cold, it was a smell. The smell of him. The smell of the collector. She got up from her bed and slowly moved toward the door. And then she heard his voice. Barely audible, like an echo rising from the darkness. You won't escape me, Betza. You know I'll always be with you. You can't get rid of it because you've become a part of me. Betza felt her heart beat faster. She understood that this nightmare would never end. He could return again, and this time, he would be stronger than ever. But this time, she was ready. The next day, after several nights of sleeplessness, Betza gathered all her strength and went to the place where it all began. She drove to the old house on the outskirts of the city, where she felt everything had started. Her heart raced, but she was determined. She knew this was her last chance. The door creaked as she entered the building. The furniture was covered in dust, but everything seemed familiar. She approached the old room where she felt his presence. And there, she saw what she hadn't expected. In the center of the room stood a huge frame, with dozens of paintings hanging inside. And each one depicted the same scene, people staring at her with lifeless eyes. In their eyes was the reflection of her own terror. "This is my collection," said the familiar voice behind her. The collector stood in the darkness, his face almost indistinguishable. Betza gathered all her resolve and said, "I will no longer be a part of you." Her voice was calm but determined. And then she made her final choice. She grabbed one of the paintings and ripped it into pieces. And the world began to crumble again. This time, the collector couldn't hold on to his collection. The world around Betza turned to dust, and the last remnants of darkness scattered into the air. Betza woke up. She was home. All her nightmares were left behind, and this time, she was truly free. She sat in silence, staring into the empty space. She felt a sense of relief. The nightmare was over. She had won. But a few minutes later, her phone rang. She picked up the receiver. "Lila?" She heard her voice. "You won't believe what happened." Betza realized that it wasn't over. The dream collector hadn't disappeared. He was always near. And now, he had a new victim. And so, as darkness once again envelopes you, we say goodbye, but not for long. Remember, the night is never truly safe. Subscribe so you don't miss the new horrors, and come back when it's time for new nightmares. Beware of the shadows, they are always near. Until next time.